You are listening to the Football Diehards podcast with your hosts, Justin Lonero and Bob Harris, sponsored by DraftKings. Sign up now using promo code Diehards, DIEHARDS. Make a first-time $5 deposit, and you'll receive a free $3 ticket.
Hello and welcome to the Football Diehards podcast. I'm your host, Justin Lonero, on Twitter at Justin Lonero, along with my co-host, Bob Harris, at Football Diehard on Twitter, and our executive producer, Kyle Dvorchak, at FF Kyle the Kid. Mr. Harris, what's going on tonight?
Not much. Been a little bit quiet, but the fun is beginning in earnest. The Ravens have reported in full to training camp. The Bears will follow suit, and then other teams, they start earlier every year. And we kind of like that. Gives us something to pay attention to, like we didn't have enough already.
Things are heating up for certain. Kyle, what's going on?
Not much. Yeah, it's the bit of a slow season. I think nearly every sport is off right now, so at least this time of year, we have nothing better to do. We actually have a reason to be talking about football.
It's a 365-day-a-year reality show. The football is genius that way, and we like it that way because we like to do the pod year-round. So, and we were, we've been kind of having keeping our finger on the pulse of the LeSean McCoy situation. There'll be plenty of news and tidbits going forward. Right now, that's kind of the big story in that, he's been accused, been implicated in some nefarious activities, a break-in at a home of his former girlfriend. There's a long history of trouble. He hasn't been charged with anything. Clearly, he was not there. The speculation is maybe he had a hand in it because specific things that the assailant was after were things that he had discussed before with this girl that he knows. So, more recently, she's kind of backing off her story. So we'll see how it plays out. The concern here is that a thing called the commissioner's exempt list, where you don't have to do a damn thing, and the commissioner can suspend you if he thinks you might have. So that's what we're watching for. And just for a little context, I did a Football Guys versus Industry draft over the last weekend. McCoy went in the 7th round. My feeling is in cases like this, there comes a point where the value, becomes too hard to pass up on. I think that's going to be the case with McCoy. We don't know if nothing's going to happen. We don't know if something's going to happen. So if you're drafting right now, you're drafting in uncertainty. Just be advised of that. Understand what you're getting into and what you're letting yourself into. Maybe do yourself a favor and draft Chris Ivory if you're drafting LeSean McCoy as well, sometime after. I think this year is a good year with running back depth, so I'm not I don't feel an overwhelming burning desire to land McCoy, -3 offensive linemen from last year with a unproven quarterback under center with not a great receiving core already. I mean, I just wonder how great it was going to be beyond volume as is, so I could live with him. What about you? What are you doing with him right now, Justin, in best balls?
Well, talk about the court of public opinion mattering here. The guy hasn't even been arrested or just a ton of scrutiny, and we've seen what the commissioner's done in the past when you're on his proverbial poop list.
Right, Ezekiel Elliott was never charged with a crime, remember?
Right, and I mean he ended up
6
having
games for him. So
hell of a season. I mean, we've had some from a fantasy angle. We touched briefly on it a few weeks ago. There's some skepticism because LeSean McCoy is 30 years old, and we know at running back when you're 30, you are expendable. But the reality is he had his 3rd highest carry total last season. When you look at the Bills' offense, it's disgusting. So from a volume standpoint, and when you look at LeSean McCoy, you had to have him a couple of weeks ago within the top 12, any way to slice it. So the fact that he went in the 7th round, and by the way, I was asked by Jeff Hastley the other day to do one of those football guys drafts. I think it's a couple of Wednesdays from now, and it is a best ball. But the fact that he went in the 7th round is kind of crazy because, again, nothing's happened yet. But look, I'm going to draft Dalvin Cook in front of him. I'm going to put Devontae Freeman in front of him at this point. Certainly Christian McCaffrey. And now he's kind of floating into that Rashad Penny, Joe Mixon, Jerick McKinnon range. The guy hasn't been charged with anything yet. While the court of public opinion matters, doesn't mean squat when push comes to shove if he doesn't get suspended. So it's certainly something to keep an eye on. But I feel like the last few days or something, it has died down, Bob. I mean, you feel like it's died down.
It's gotten quiet, and the victim of the crime has kind of dialed back the chatter a little bit. Although she wasn't the one putting it out in the first place. A friend of hers put some photos out on Instagram. And we don't know a lot of context about those either. So yeah, it's just the court of public opinion does not matter here. The court of Roger Goodell matters here. And so that's the only question. So we just have to kind of take a wait and see approach. But people are going to back off him. I'm a big proponent of when value is created, I want to be the value fireman. I want to run into that burning building and drag the body out, and when the price is right. So it's not going to keep me from drafting him because, again, we don't know that anything has happened. He was in Miami. The incident was in Georgia. There's a lot of circumstantial things going on, and that may prompt the commissioner to take action. We'll just have to wait and see. In the meantime, just assume that it's going to be baked into the price if you're, haven't been following the news closely, and all of a sudden you're wondering, why the hell is nobody drafting LaShawn McCoy? That's why. And make your own adjustment. Some of it's going to be your own risk tolerance, and some of it is going to be, what the news is at any given time. And right now it's very quiet.
I feel like you were kind of hesitant on Shady McCoy prior to all this news, given that he was age 30 and you weren't high on him.
Yeah, I was backing off him anyway. I mean, but that's the thing, because I don't want to pay the price. The price now is dirt cheap. Look, I think when you're drafting McCoy, you're drafting volume with some big play upside. That's worth something in fantasy football. I had him, there's a lot of guys I like better. All the guys that you mentioned I like better. And I was ahead. I would rather have had Jordan Howard ahead of him, maybe even Joe Mixon before this, and maybe that's where the kind of cutoff was for me. We learn every year. We get new lessons in offensive lines matter.
Yep. And
when you have 3 starters, you lose 3 starters from an offensive line. You have a new quarterback. You have a lack of downfield threats in the receiving core.
Yep.
And be a sudden emergence somebody. That puts a lot of onus not only on McCoy, but it makes the work of the opposing defensive coordinators a hell of a lot easier.
Yeah.
So those were my concerns with McCoy. And honestly, they're still my concerns. And they go away a little bit when he's sitting there in the 7th round. And had the person who drafted him not drafted him, I was a couple picks away. I'm going, damn, I have no choice. It's 7th round. I'm taking McCoy.
Yeah, and there is zero balance on this offense. Like you said, Bob, and he's a year older, right? The son is the same in a relative way, but we're older. So you have a 30-year-old LaShawn McCoy with just zero balance. So for a defensive coordinator, he's going to see so many loaded boxes, not even be funny. But based on volume alone, for me, he's still a top 20 running back in fantasy land. Go ahead, Kyle.
Yeah, I was just going to say, to add some context to what Bob said about the commissioner's exempt list, if you're newer to fantasy or just haven't gone crazy and deep, aren't degenerates like we are, you might remember Adrian Peterson and even as far back as Michael Vick, essentially these players who we don't know exactly what the legal action will be, and the crime is maybe, I don't want to say heinous, but the crimes are serious allegations, but we just don't have enough information. Roger Goodell can basically make the decision not to suspend the player, but just say you can't play until we get more information, until we find out what happened. And it basically sidelined Adrian Peterson for a whole season, if I remember correctly. But anyway, that gives some context as to what could happen, although it's still early in the summer. We'll certainly get more news on this. Moving on to our road trip, the summer divisional road trip, we head north to the NFC, starting with the Detroit Lions. The first question I have for you guys is, will the Lions throw enough to allow Marvin Jones, Kenny Golladay, Golden Tate to all return fantasy value? Bob, floor is yours.
Yes. Look, I do think, Matt Patricia wants to do something, he would like to run and play defense. I'm pretty sure they added some, to the backfield, and that all makes sense. But in the end, you retained Jim Bob Cooter, the offensive coordinator, and I do like nothing better than some hot Cooter talk on the podcast. So, you look at the attempts the last couple of years, 565, 594, 592, 600, 634, 727. I mean, this team has relied on Matt Stafford. I do think they've rebuilt the offensive line. in a way that's more physical, more athletic, perhaps more, suitable for the run blocking than it has been in the past. The addition of Kerryon Johnson is good news. But Matthew Stafford's still going to throw the ball a hell of a lot. I've been drafting him in the 10th round greedily, I will say. Greedily drafting him in the 10th round.
Well, hey, well said, partner. Look, this time last year, the Kenny Golladay buzz was high when he was drafted. I think he's a taller wide receiver, so some fans, obviously they miss Calvin Johnson in Detroit a little bit, but the identity of the Detroit Lions is slinging the football, right? And you look at Matt Stafford every single year, like you said, Bob, it's going to be 550 times he's going to throw the football. Last year, Golden Tate, Marvin Jones, respectively, finished, I want to say, wide receiver 15 and 16, if I'm not correct. And what Golden Tate, edges Marvin Jones in is receptions, and then Marvin Jones kind of compensated as a deeper threat with the touchdowns. There's enough balls to be thrown around to support two potential high-end wide receiver twos, and there's going to be weeks where Tate is a wide receiver one. Now, we don't know anything about Kenny Golladay. We do know that Eric Ebron is out of the equation. There are some red zone targets to go around right now. And look, talk about balance. The Lions are one of these teams where, and I've said this before, I feel like they haven't had a ground game, a solid running game since Barry Sanders. They drafted Kerryon Johnson. I think that's a beautiful thing. Amir Abdullah, that test did not work out. He coughed up the football a couple times last season, and he had an opportunity. And they brought in LeGarrette Blount for obvious reasons. I think it's to kind of be that masher, if you will. And we also know with Theo Redicus, he's going to catch 50, 60 balls, so I think is a deep sleeper and doesn't get the recognition that he should. So kind of a crowded backfield. I think the hope is to have balance, but if there's one thing, and like you mentioned, Bob, the offensive line has improved. There were some injuries last season. Matt Stafford's going to throw the ball 550 times, and he's a top 12 fantasy quarterback any way you carve it. Right, like we talked about Phillip Rivers, I have Stafford right in that level of comfort with Phillip Rivers, and it's a trend. He's going to make some stupid decisions, but QB1.
On that, the crowded backfield, worries me. I do think, when you look at the receiving core, we do know what Kenny Golladay is. Right. He's big and fast. Mm-hmm. Those matter. And I think when you look at Golden Tate, he's kind of the different guy there right now. Marvin Jones, another speed threat, a downfield kind of guy.
Right.
But you look at Tate, 90 catches at least over the past 4 years. Pro Football Focus noted he's forced 116 missed tackles since 2013. That's the top total in the league. So great run after the catch. That's why he does so well with the short balls and the bubble screen. So I think his role is more easily, divined than maybe Jones, and who might share a little bit more with Golladay this year. And I think that maybe it has me backing off him a little bit. And I'm interested in Golladay, especially in best ball. I think he's a great value right now in best ball.
Yeah, Kenny Golladay had 5 receptions last year, 40 yards or over. And, of course, he did miss some time with a hamstring injury. He's tall, he's fast, and he's certainly not Calvin Johnson. Yet, is there enough scraps to go around with Marvin Jones and Golden Tate in the equation? I'm not certain there is, just from a math standpoint. But, again, Eric Ebron's out of the equation. You mentioned Golden Tate. He's Jarvis Landry-esque. You know what he's going to do. He's an underneath type of wide receiver, but his target success rate last year was close to 77%. So he's sure-handed. Golden Tate has had 90 receptions 3 years in a row. Not a high touchdown guy, but he's sure-handed, and we certainly like that. He stays on the field, and that's also important. If you look around the league, there's not a lot of players that play 16 games. You can lump Demaryius Thomas in that equation. Golden Tate is certainly in that equation. Larry Fitzgerald. But after that, Jarvis Landry, who I mentioned, has missed a game in 3 seasons. So stays on the field. I think Golden Tate's role is and people ask me all the time, who do you like better, Marvin Jones or Golden Tate? I think Golden Tate is going to catch 90 balls. That's what he does. Just don't expect him to have double-digit touchdowns. So I like the Detroit Lions offense as a whole. Their identity is throwing the ball with some semblance of obviously balance in that kind of somewhat crowded backfield.
Lots of love for the receivers. We saw Eric Ebron kind of washed out of Detroit. Now they bring in Seattle backup Luke Wilson. Bob, is there any chance for any sort of Luke Wilson sleeper potential, or is it just no?
Sure. I've thrown some last round darts at him. I think in best ball, it's not an unreasonable play. He's an athletic guy, pass catching tight end. So in an offense where, again, there's going to be a lot of passes thrown. So sure, flyer. Nothing more though. Nothing more than a best round flyer. Don't be drafting him in redraft. There's plenty of tight end twos with upside that I think are more than suitable. But as the season goes on, he's a player to watch and keep an eye to see if he emerges as something.
He's 28, but I think it's his job right now. The guy, I think he's had close to 40 or 45 receptions over the last 3 seasons, so we don't really know what he is, but there's targets to go around at this point. So
we do know what he is. He's a Canadian.
He's a Canadian. He's 28 years old. He's a big guy.
Oh, he's Canadian? All right. Moving on. All right. We've got sleeper potential at tight end. We've got some deeper plays like Kenny Golladay going as a wide receiver 4, and then lots of love at the top with Marvin Jones, Golden Tate. All this love going around to guys catching passes. How does this make you feel about Matthew Stafford in your quarterback rankings? Justin, go ahead.
As I have stated, when you hear Matt Stafford, I think there's been seasons where we've been hesitant, particularly early on in his career. But when I think of Matt Stafford, like I just said, and today, I have him in the same kind of set of lenses as I have Phillip Rivers or Kirk Cousins. There are good offenses. They're going to be able to move the football. Matt Stafford stayed on the field a ton. The guy is going to throw 30 touchdowns. He's not going to throw a ton of interceptions. We certainly like that. He's not going to rush for a ton of yards, but when you talk about Marvin Jones and you talk about Golden Tate and you talk about Kenny Golladay, weapons galore in a competitive NFC North, as we've talked tonight. And again, I'll reiterate the fact that there might be this is a backfield that looks unique and certainly interesting. When they drafted Kerryon Johnson, I think he'll probably get the bulk. But LeGarrette Blount he showed here in New England, he can carry the football a ton. He's obviously getting older. And Theo Riddick is one of these guys that has been dependable for Matthew Stafford. 50, 60 catches for Theo Riddick. If I were to bet money tonight, Matt Stafford's going to throw 30 touchdowns. And that's as good as what you're going to get out of Rivers, and it's probably similar to what you're going to get out of Aaron Rodgers, give or take a few touchdowns. So I'm fine with Matt Stafford as a QB1 all day, and I have been for years now.
Opportunities abound, and that's good.
All right, I think we can now move on to the Green Bay Packers. Aaron Rodgers should finally return under center. Now Davante Adams will be his lead receiver. What does this make Davante Adams' ceiling, being the lead receiver for Aaron Rodgers, who is maybe the most prolific touchdown thrower in the history of the NFL? Bob, go ahead.
Davante Adams, the only receiver in the NFL, wide receiver to catch double-digit touchdowns each of the last 2 years. More than capable of doing that again. Touchdowns are always risky business, but he plays with Aaron Rodgers. His ceiling is, I'm guessing, around wide receiver 4-ish.
Justin, do you feel the same way? That's a pretty. That's among the best in the league ceiling.
Did he just say wide receiver 4?
I did.
Look, Bob Bob uses a word on this podcast every week, and it's opportunity. And where Jordy Nelson has departed, we had Josh Hermsmeyer on the show last week, and he's optimistic about Nelson. But Jordy Nelson was a fixture of this Packers offense for a long time, and a Green Bay Packers offense that has had a pretty much awful, inconsistent running game. So Rodgers has thrown the ball a ton. Missed 9 games last season. You have to have him right at QB1 or 2. He's historically, we're going to look back and say this is one of the greats. A great story all around. But back to Davante Adams. Look, he's top 8, and that's predicated on the opportunities that he's going to have in Green Bay. I don't know that I would put him in front of DeAndre Hopkins or Keenan Allen, but he's right in that Julio Jones, AJ Green, I wouldn't put him in front of Michael Thomas either, but I might put Davante Adams at this point, potentially in front of AJ Green, Mike Evans, and Doug Baldwin. So top 8 for me as far as Adams.
Yeah, the question was, what's the ceiling?
75 receptions the last 2 seasons. I think it can only go up. All right. I mean, from that angle, look, I think we can all agree that AB is 1, DeAndre Hopkins is going to be 2.
Yep.
Beckham 3.
Yep. And there you have it.
And there you have it. Yeah. So
right. So,
ambiguity.
I mean, look, I don't know that he's going to do it. I like Keenan Allen an awful lot. I think he has that same potential. Julio Jones has that same potential. They all have that similar ceiling. And I think, for me, I like Keenan Allen an awful lot. I think he's a very consistent producer week in, week out. His opportunities are growing. But not all those guys play with Aaron Rodgers, and I think that makes a difference.
Right. And he missed 2 games last season. Adams missed 2 games.
Yeah, the concussion issue might be a little bit of a concern for me, as it is with any player, but trying to be injury agnostic, I try to ignore those kind of things and not build them into my draft calculus.
I like it. I know we've talked about this before, so feel free to keep it short, but now that we've had time to digest the Aaron Jones suspension, the rise in Ty Montgomery draft stock right now, who's the best value in this backfield? Go ahead, Bob.
It's still Montgomery for me. I'm drafting the last guy in a row, the guy with the most defined role. We talked about this previous. I mean, it looks like, in Marvin Jones' case, maybe he's going to split up his role to some degree with Kenny Golladay, assuming Golladay progresses. I think it's the same situation for Jamal Williams and Aaron Jones. They're going to eat each other's production at some point when Aaron Jones is back. A lot of people think Jones is the better runner. A lot of people think that Williams is the more consistent guy. Somewhere in between, they're going to split that early down role, and Ty Montgomery seems to have the most consistent role, and he's the cheaper guy. I like cheap. He's it for me in terms of, and I'm assuming a PPR format for pretty much everything I've said tonight.
We're all adults here. It's PPR.
Right. So that's where I'm at. I'm often looking for the value, and don't underestimate the possibility or at least dismiss it completely that Montgomery ends up playing the full role if there are injuries or other issues at some point. So that's the guy I'm drafting because I like the price.
I tend to agree with you. I think this hybrid role that we're seeing more and more of is Ty Montgomery. We yearn for kind of the Duke Johnsons of the world. I mean, they're on every team. And I think Montgomery, as I mentioned, Theo Riddick, a dependable guy in Detroit. I think Montgomery healthy. And we saw this a couple seasons ago. Aaron Rodgers loved him. And as I alluded to, with Jordy Nelson out of the equation, there are targets to go around. So I think Randall Cobb's going to do his thing. He's been dependable in Green Bay for a while, but Ty Montgomery's kind of that Tavon Austin type of player. Now, in terms of Aaron Jones is going to be suspended for the first couple of weeks. So I think we're going to see a lot of Jamal Williams. Like Bob said, Aaron Jones might be the more talented one, but all 3 of these running backs missed time last season. So it is a little bit cloudy at this point, but whether it's Williams or Aaron Jones down the stretch from a volume standpoint, Ty Montgomery's role certainly seems to be, solidified given what he's going to be. I think he's going to be on the field. And I think, like Theo Riddick, I think we can lock in Ty Montgomery for 50 to 60 receptions, and his price is just about free. So I'm happy with that. I think you're going to get similar production from Ty Montgomery as you'll get from a Giovanni Bernard or James White, and I'm perfectly content with that.
All right, the Packers brought in Jimmy Graham this offseason, 5.5 yards per target, his 1.2 yards per route run. Last season among tight ends, 36th and 34th in the league. Is he exclusively a red zone weapon at this point, but on an Aaron Rodgers offense? Does that rule him out of being a top tight end scorer? Justin, floor is yours.
I think he does. You guys know what I like to call tight end, and that is a sea of mediocrity. Who's going to be used in the red zone? I think that guy is Jimmy Graham. I mean, Jimmy Graham has been fortunate in his career. I mean, you start your career with Drew Brees, then you get to see what Russell Wilson has to offer in Seattle, and now you get Aaron Rodgers. Is he a 75, 80 reception guy like he was in New Orleans? No. Is he 6'7", 260, and 31 years old in a place that is looking for some talent now that Jordy Nelson is out of the equation? They did draft a couple wide receivers. Yeah. I mean, I'm going to have Jimmy Graham as a top 10 tight end. Am I going to go crazy and out of my way to have him? Absolutely not. But look, 10 touchdowns last season. I am fine with that. With a healthy Aaron Rodgers, look, it wasn't that long ago where we were talking about Rob Gronkowski and Jimmy Graham in the same sentence, 1A and 1B. And the differentiator was the ability to block for Rob Gronkowski. So I am very cool drafting Jimmy Graham. I'll have him in the same scope as a Delaney Walker, Jordan Reed, Kyle Rudolph, right in that top 10 range. But I will take him if the price is right.
Seems reasonable. Again, Justin is right. I mean, if you're playing with Aaron Rodgers, you're very tall. You still run a 4.7. I think that's what he mentioned himself, Jimmy Graham, upon arrival. And the Packers offense has been at its best over the years when they have a kind of a guy who can split the seam down the middle at tight end. I don't think they have that. I think that guy we haven't seen in 3 years since he left New Orleans. But as a red zone weapon, I'm on board with him, and I think he's a reasonable draft, reasonable tight end one for that reason.
Let me throw it back to you, Bob. Aaron Rodgers comes back. We've seen not only his number one receiver have success, but his second receiver as well. Will that guy be Randall Cobb, and does that make him a value starting to go in the double-digit rounds, 8, 9, 10 range?
Yeah, that's the key. I mean, there was a point where you could get him well into the double-digit rounds. Not so much now. MFL 10s in the last week, he's up closer to round 7, round 8, maybe into round 8. That's a little higher than I like. There are people who will argue he's not the same player, and I mean that makes sense. Maybe he's lost a step, but still, if the price is right, Aaron Rodgers is a tide that raises all boats. So sure, I'm on board with him at the right price. I think it's starting to climb a little bit to where I'm not as comfortable drafting him, but not averse to it at the right price. If he hits those double digits, hell yeah.
Justin, do you win on the Randall Cobb train?
Absolutely. He's been around. We talk about rapport, and I think Randall Cobb has a rapport with Aaron Rodgers, permitting Randall Cobb stays on the field. I mean, you talk about Sterling Shepard, talk about Jamison Crowder. Randall Cobb is essentially the glorified version of those two. Ben McAdoo went to the Giants, and the hope was to use Sterling Shepard like he used Randall Cobb. I mean, I think we know at this point what Randall Cobb is. He's very successful in terms of targets, over 71% over the last 2 seasons. I could see him sitting right in the 100+ target range, which we like. 65 receptions, close to 700 yards, and 4 or 5 touchdowns. Am I going to get Randall Cobb to say this is my wide receiver too? Absolutely not. I mean, I hammer wide receivers early, so I don't have to worry about the Randall Cobbs or the Shepards of the world. But as my wide receiver 4 or 5, I'm going to take a 28-year-old Randall Cobb who's played with Aaron Rodgers. And again, going back to, the Packers are going to miss Jordy Nelson, what he brought to the table. So whether that's Jimmy Graham, whether that's going to be Ty Montgomery stepping up, and maybe we could see shades of what Randall Cobb did 3 or 4 years ago. But at this point, I'm very comfortable permitting he plays 16 games. Again, 70 receptions, 700 yards, five touchdowns, and I think that's pretty much a lock.
All right, final question for the Packers. Bob, does Aaron Rodgers' health at all concern you?
No.
Sweet.
0%.
Awesome. Moving on to Minnesota. We know Dalvin Cook from, our small sample size, but from what we saw, he is both talented and they are willing to give him the opportunity. So I think a floor there, barring health, is pretty much set. But does he have a ceiling as a top 5 back, Justin?
When you talk about the knee and a torn ACL, I think you have to have issues. Now, science has been enhanced over the last few years, so we've seen players bounce back. But if you got an opportunity to see Dalvin Cook run at Florida State, he is a special, special talent. Top 5? Why not? There's been data where a lot of these running backs that finish RB1s the previous year do not repeat. I have Dalvin Cook in the top 12, and that's in the after Leonard Fournette and the Melvin Gordons of the world. Dalvin Cook, prior to this LaShawn McCoy news, was right in that 10 or 11 range with Devontae Freeman. I think his ceiling is top 10. I'm not going to, again, it was the knee, Kyle, so I don't care how good science is. They're going to ease him in. He's an investment. The kid has a bright future. I like what you said earlier, Kyle. I mean, this kid, he was, prior to his injury, he was thrusted into a role where it looked like he was going to be a player that got 400 touches. And then, we all got screwed as fans, and he went down. So we got a heavy dose of Latavius Murray, which, isn't the sexiest thing in the world. So top 10 for Cook. Am I hesitant because it's the knee? Absolutely. As a fan, I I look forward to him being one of the best running backs in the league over years to come.
Yeah, it is running back, so certainly he has top 5 ceiling. I mean, he just has to reach it. But the knee is obviously something we'll have to watch through training camp. That it happened in week 4, that lends a little more optimism to me. The fact that he plays for the Minnesota Vikings, where they are familiar with the training staff that's been around there quite some time, and knows how to handle ACLs according to Adrian Peterson's 2,000-yard season post-ACL. Granted, it's Adrian Peterson, but nonetheless, the Vikings have it goes beyond Peterson. They have a very good history and a really good understanding of how to bring these guys back.
That's a really good point. I'm glad you brought that up. Now we have Kirk Cousins brought on the first fully guaranteed deal, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah, first fully guaranteed deal, brought in as their new starting quarterback over Case Keenum. Now he has 2 of the top receivers as opposed to what he had in Washington, but which one of these is your guy?
The cheaper one. Again, a lot of times I'll split these guys, and we know what the shortcoming for Stephon Diggs is. There are periods where he disappears, often injury related, or has been to this point. I'm trying not to draft that. I'm trying, and so I'm fine. I think his ceiling might be higher because he's more of a big play threat. He creates a little more on his own. So look, I wouldn't knock anyone for drafting either of these guys. I'll just go with the slightly cheaper one at the moment.
Who is Adam Thielen? Do we know what Adam Thielen is? He looked spectacular last season. He is a tad pricier at this moment. Now, the ADPs are relatively close. I think they come closer. I think there is a little bit more of allure to Stephon Diggs at this point. He's younger. I think it's a sexier name. He's got a propensity to get in the end zone more than Thielen has shown. But, Thielen had 27 more receptions than Stephon Diggs last season. Unclear rapport with Kirk Cousins. So anything can happen at this point. I'm going to take the cheaper guy as well. Now, I will say this. I talk about the sea of mediocrity in terms of tight ends. I think Kyle Rudolph, who we mentioned on this podcast earlier this offseason, I am digging Kyle Rudolph because we saw the connection that Cousins had with Jordan Reed when Jordan Reed was on the field. I think that Cousins can lean on Kyle Rudolph in kind of that same scope. So there's no excuses for Kirk Cousins to move the football up and down the field, especially if Dalvin Cook is healthy. To your original question, Kyle, give me Stephon Diggs. He's cheaper, and I think he's talented. I mean, anytime you draw Antonio Brown comparisons, that's a pretty good thing at this point. He's young, so there's more polish, and it'll be interesting to see how he pans out. But I think Stephon Diggs, out of that class, with Amari Cooper, some will say that Stephon Diggs is the best wide receiver in that class. I'm optimistic. But again, unclear rapport with a new quarterback in town. So, and game scripts. I mean, how are the game scripts going to go? They're going to run the football. They got a fantastic defense. And I mentioned Phillip Rivers. I mentioned Matthew Stafford. I think you have to put Kirk Cousins right in that scope. I don't think Kirk Cousins is Joe Montana, but you have to look at those offensive pieces that we've mentioned and be really optimistic about what Cousins can do this season.
Right. Well, 2 things. Number one, I mean, Diggs was a 5th-round pick. Nobody had high expectations for him. He certainly surpassed those. And twice now you have mentioned sexy people, and we haven't even mentioned me, and I'm a little shocked at that. But anyhow.
Well, you're certainly attractive.
Thank you.
I've never met you. I can't confirm. I'm sorry.
But you've seen pictures. We both have faces for radio.
Nobody denies that.
Kyle, you're handsome. That's your Twitter profile picture, is it not? Look like a young Dan Marino.
It's pretty grainy, but I'll take the compliment. I'll take compliments all day.
I don't know why it's funny how you talk about Sigmund Bloom and the golden age.
This is not a conversation about handsome. This is a conversation about sexy. They're 2 different things, kids.
That's true.
I'm definitely not. I'm in one tier, and that is another tier ahead. And speaking of tiers, we've got our top 3 tiers of tight end right now. Gronk, Travis Kelce, Zach Ertz are the big 3. Is Kyle Rudolph anywhere close to the 4th tight end?
Sure. I mean, I think, there's that group. You pick the guy you like out of that next, I guess for me, it's Kelce and Gronk 1 tier. Ertz kind of in his own tier. And then beyond that, there's a whole batch of guys that kind of go, that I would call the next tier. Delaney Walker, Evan Ingram, Graham, Rudolph's in that group as well. Great red zone presence. And again, as Justin mentioned, Kirk Cousins has shown an affinity, scheme based to throw the tight end, but the Vikings have no problem. John DeFilippo comes from Philadelphia, the new offensive coordinator, where they use 2 tight ends effectively and 1, Zach Ertz, very effectively. So, yeah, I'm fine. I think he's in that next tier.
Justin, do you think he has any chance of hitting the first tier, or I guess, what Bob calls, 1B tier, the second tier with Zach Ertz?
There's a lot of scratch to go around in Minnesota. We throw all these names out there, but Kyle Rudolph has been dependable. Stays on the field. He's going to have up around 100 targets. No. Rob Gronkowski and Travis Kelce at this point are in their own tier. I think it's nice to see Zach Ertz and his, I've been keen on Zach Ertz for years. But outside of that, it's anybody's game. I mean, we talk about Evan Ingram. He had the role he had by default. Who is 33-year-old Greg Olsen at this point? If you asked me 2 years ago, I would put Olsen in, right in that. Kelce, probably 3. 2 years ago. So it's top 7 or 8. I'm fine. I mean, I get to have Kyle Rudolph as a top 10 tight end.
Over the last 2 years, only Jimmy Graham and Rudolph have the most touchdown catches for tight ends. So, I mean, he's that guy, and that's worth something. It's just, is he going to be a consistent contributor in the offense beyond that? Beyond the red zone threat? That's the question, and probably the thing that's going to determine what tier he ends up in. Yeah. And again, with John DeFilippo coming from the Eagles, maybe there's some hope that they scheme a little more to bring Rudolph up into that Zach Ertz range. But right now the price is favorable, and it's worth a gamble if you like him anyway.
Do you like Kyle Rudolph more than Jordan Reed?
I think it's a safer play. I mean, I think Jordan Reed's upside remains unchanged. It's just we all know the price, but you're getting him cheaper than you're getting Rudolph. So as long as if you draft Jordan Reed and you're waiting to the 9th or 10th round, which is about where he's been going, and you have a viable plan B, and that could be Vernon Davis with a last round flyer in your draft, right? I mean, if you want to have that tight end production. So, just whenever you draft a guy like Reed or Tyler Eifert for that matter, to me it kind of forces you to draft 3 deep at the position. So that's the drawback, and that's not a drawback with Rudolph.
Well said, Bob. I think that can bring us to a close on the Vikings as we move on to our final team, the Chicago Bears. Allen Robinson has just 1 top 24 fantasy productions of his 4 NFL years. That was also in the Blake Bortles Garbage Time show. Is he really the Allen Robinson we saw that year and as good as his ADP currently suggests? Justin, go ahead.
I think Allen Robinson is a top 20 NFL wide receiver. My friend Matt Harmon, formerly of NFL.com and now with Yahoo, did his reception perception and absolutely loved Allen Robinson. He charted really well. He had the misfortune of playing with an erratic Blake Bortles for quite a bit of time. We've seen some frustration. Look, we're optimistic about what Mitch Trubisky can do in Chicago. So I think as he goes, Allen Robinson will go. And, of course, they added Trey Burton, who a lot of people in fantasy circles are keen on, and there's going to be a stout running game. We've talked about Matt Nagy, using Jordan Howard and Louis Cohen. The Bears are going to be an interesting team. Allen Robinson's coming off an injury. He's still young. He's tall. I think that his ceiling, I think he can be a top 12 to 15 wide receiver. Why not? I mean, if you can perform with Blake Bortles, who we've seen be about as inconsistent as anybody, I think that, if Trubisky is who we think that he can be, there's no reason why Allen Robinson can't be a top 15 tight end. I have him in the top 20 in that range there. Again, it's a new team, so we don't know, and he's coming off an injury. We don't know exactly who he is, but I'm eager, to say the least, to see what Allen Robinson can do in Chicago.
Yeah, I'll buy all that. I mean, look, he's a big, fast, athletic guy, able to high point balls, could take, catch 50-50 balls, solid up route runner, and we expect the offense to be high powered. I think right now his ADP is very reasonable. I don't have a lot of shares of him. I think there's plenty of wide receivers in that range, but look, I'm not averse to him. You just have to have a little faith in what the Bears are doing, and if you buy in, maybe you can reap some great rewards from it.
Speaking of having a little faith, Trey Burton flashed a lot last season when he was given the opportunity, but are those small flashes in the pan, or are they truly who he is as a tight end, currently going as the tight end 9 just inside the top 100? Justin, go ahead.
think if I had him ranked 10th in the football diehard in the draft book for one of the magazines. Like I continue to say, it's a sea of mediocrity. We don't know what the hell Trey Burton is. We do know that Matt Nagy worked with Travis Kelce, so the tight end will be involved, and that tight end is going to be Trey Burton, who's 26 years old. Do we know who he is? We do not. Is he worth taking a stab at? Absolutely. There's not, outside of Allen Robinson and their sound running game, which I think is going to be a large part of their identity, you have Trey Burton. There's a lot of mediocrity, the Taylor Gabriels of the world. So am I going to put him in front of Delaney Walker? No. Am I going to put him in front of Jordan Reed based on his upside? No. The Rudolphs of the world? No. Jimmy Graham? No. Evan Ingram? No. But outside of those players, I think Trey Burton tonight sits as a top 10 or 11 tight end. But again, you guys know how I feel about the position. I think there's plenty of tight ends that I'm optimistic about, including the Charles Clays and the Austin Hoopers of the world. I can go on and on. We can stream the position, but if I had to rank them again tonight, I have Trey Burton at tight end 10.
Yeah, my sources tell me tight end is a sea of mediocrity this year.
Right.
That's
right.
So look, Trey Burton goes into Chicago. They gave him a 4-year, $32 million deal. Follow the money. The investment tells you something. And we also know that Matt Nagy, when he showed up, one of his first conversations, according to local reporting, with GM Ryan Pace, said, hey, I need a guy to be the U tight end. That's what Travis Kelce played.
Yep.
It's a hybrid role, tight end, receiver, kind of slide. So,
right.
Yeah, I mean, look, the upside's there. And if you're taking a gamble at the position, I can think of worse gambles. So I'm on board with that just based on the potential role. I don't have a ton of shares at him because the price has been climbing since I started Best Balls. I liked him when he was, available outside being a top 10 prospect, but that's not what you're paying now. So I'm getting fewer shares of him as the price rises. But still, I think, as a speculative play, you could do a hell of a lot worse.
Where do you have Trey Burton tonight? Just from curiosity. I mean, where would you?
I have him right around where you have him. I mean, I think you could make an argument that he's being overdrafted, but if you want him, you're probably going to have to pay a top 10 price for him. I have him at 10 right now.
Sounds like we have a consensus there. Moving on to the backfield. Right now, we've got a lot of hate being showered onto Jordan Howard because he can't catch the ball. And while that may be true, that doesn't necessarily rule him out from being a quality fantasy back. Bob, how do you see the Tariq Cohen-Jordan Howard split shaking out?
He's a running back, not a receiving back. Sure. It's okay. I think Matt Nagy is a smart coach and will understand how to make use of him. Obviously, Jordan Howard wants to work on his receiving ability. Not catching the ball does not preclude him from scoring touchdowns or carrying the ball 20 times a game. I'm hoping that there'll be a creative use of Tariq Cohen. There's been a lot of talk about, being some kind of pseudo Tyreek Hill. I don't know if he's capable of that, or maybe he is, and maybe that's how they'll use him. He's been lobbying for that kind of role. But I'm not keen on his price right now. I'd rather have Howard. I think Howard's a better value. Matt Nagy said at one point, look, Howard is considered our primary back. I think that means something to me, and it means a pretty heavy volume. And I think the thing that we need to remember is going from a medieval offense to a 21st century offense could mean fewer men in the box on a regular basis. That would work in Jordan's favor. So I like Howard at his current price. I think Cohen maybe is priced a little high, just in almost like Burton, in anticipation. We, fantasy owners, we have a thing for the optimism of the unknown. We don't know how bad something's going to suck. We think it's going to be awesome, right? We haven't seen it suck yet with Matt Nagy. So we're expecting the best, and I like that about us. We're an optimistic tribe, the fantasy community. So I'm more optimistic about Howard than I am Cohen. I think it's going to be a secondary role.
That's true. And look, with Jordan Howard, talk about bell cows dying. I think Jordan Howard has shown us that he can withstand 250 carries. He's rushed for over 1,100 yards over the last 2 seasons and 15 touchdowns. So the fact that he can't catch, and we've seen running backs that are not great pass catchers, from a fantasy angle.
But he's really bad.
Yeah, he's not good. But the reality is, this is why you have Tariq Cohen. Emily Hunt tweeted something a few weeks ago saying if Tariq Cohen wasn't on the Bears, he's a guy that could have, I don't want to misquote Emory Hunt, but he said something along the lines of he could have 250, 300 touches. I don't know. Tariq Cohen's 5'6", 181, and he's kind of like these running backs that I mentioned when that every team yearns for in that Ty Montgomery type of role. Tariq, so where you don't have to be nervous the fact that Jordan Howard isn't a great pass catcher. You have Tariq Cohen for that role, who, I like Tariq Cohen because he fits the mold for zero running backs. I think he's obviously efficient in the passing game. He was second on the team in targets last season. So, I think Tariq Cohen has a role carved out, and that's a beautiful thing going into, 2018. We know what Jordan Howard's going to do. He's going to be a bull. He's going to get 20 carries a game. And I think that, Tariq Cohen is going to have 5 or 6 receptions every week, I think is the hope.
Bob, you mentioned they were going from medieval offense. I really don't think this can be understated. Last year, they were 31st in plays ran, largely in part because they were 31st in pace, courtesy of Football Outsiders. Looking at the past decade, single games with the lowest amount of plays ran by an offense, the Bears have 2 of them. Last season, they had 2 of the worst games in terms of amount of times they were doing something in one season over the past decade. Moving on to Matt Nagy, will he be able to turn around Mitchell Trubisky from year 1 to year 2 like we saw Sean McVay do with Jared Goff? Bob?
That's the hope, right? I mean, that's why he's the coach of the Chicago Bears. Ryan Pace, made a crazy move that upset much of the fan base in order to secure Mitchell Trubisky. And so he is greatly invested, not just in terms of team resources, but in terms of his own job security. And Mitchell Trubisky turning into the guy he expected. So, when you see these teams bring in offensive-minded coaches and I don't know, I would maybe argue that Trubisky looked better eyeball test-wise than Goff did as a rookie. Thrust into the job much sooner than we expected. But I mean, look, he has a lot of mobility. He's athletic. He's a big guy, got a big arm. I mean, yeah, that's the hope. And I mean, if you're drafting, if you're in a normal league, a normal 12-man league, you could do worse for drafting a quarterback 2 with some upside. And if you don't see it, be ready to bail on him and find another QB2 with maybe less upside, but more certain production. But I think I think he's one of those guys that we're all pitting our hopes on. A change in offense, a change in philosophy, and coaching staff that goes with that is all going to suit him well. And, early reports are positive on that. So it's definitely something that if you draft a guy, we talked about 2 guys in this show, Phillip Rivers and Matthew Stafford. I mean, I'm fine starting either of those, and I'm drafting them late. If I want to wait even later and draft a backup with some upside, Trubisky is one of those guys. And you don't have to pay the Patrick Mahomes premium that Justin so loathes.
I know.
Yes, 3 shows in a row. Keep it coming, Bob. Justin, does this hope have you taking any Anthony Miller in redraft?
At the end of a draft, absolutely. I mean, when you look at receiving cores like they had, I mean, who is Kevin White? We don't know. Was he a product of what they do at West Virginia? It's one of these names that just keeps getting bounced around. We know who Taylor Gabriel is. These are not names that are jumping out at us. So, look, they drafted him round 2, 5'11", out of Memphis. I think there's some optimism there. I think it's a team that outside of Allen Robinson and the running backs we talked to in Trey Burton, they need a playmaker. And Anthony Miller was a top 5 or 6 wide receiver coming off the board, so why not? But again, it's hinged on what Mitch Trubisky is. I mean, we all saw Mike Mayock's jaw drop when they moved up to get Trubisky after they gave Mike Glennon a blank check. So the organization, being the Chicago Bears, sees something in Trubisky. Now, is he a less sexier Alex Smith? And of course, that doesn't say much from a football angle. But if he's nearly as safe and efficient as Alex Smith, the Bears are going to be in pretty good shape. Are they a 10-win team? Probably not. It's a tough division. But again, like Bob always says, I mean, these GMs and obviously head coaches know a hell of a lot more than we do. So, you give Mitch Trubisky those proverbial keys to the castle, let him go through the aches and pains, which Patrick Mahomes is going to go through a number of times this season, and let him do his thing. And with that, you grow, you get comfortable. And we've seen it with some of these guys like the Carson Wentz and the Deshaun Watson. It's a beautiful thing to see. So as fans, it's going to be nice to see Mitch Trubisky hopefully be one of the future star quarterbacks in the NFL, but time will tell.
My sources tell me he's not as sexy as me.
No, you're pretty attractive, and Kyle is sexy. You and I are. We're certainly attractive. Kyle, I mean, again, you look like a young Dan Marino. I'm like, what is this, a GQ? Look like an Abercrombie. I looked at your picture a couple weeks ago. I said, wow, is that like a young Dan Marino? Is that Kyle? I mean, what's he doing working with Bob and I? But
Justin, I never saw young Dan Marino. I know old kind of wrinkly Dano. So
he's
maybe go somewhere else.
Dan Marino's a good looking man.
I'll take your word for it. I think that can bring us to a close. Talked about all the important stuff. My looks, Bob's looks, Justin looks, Patrick Mahomes, everything this show needs to cover. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure if you want your Diehards pod updates, you follow Bob at Football Diehard, myself at FF Kyle the Kid, and Justin Lonero at Justin Lonero. Thanks for tuning in.